Theories of Creation, Talk 4. This talk is about progressive creation and goes together with the day-age theory. This theory seeks to reconcile current scientific theories with what is stated in the first 11 chapters of Genesis, but with one main exception. It's made very clear that most of the presuppositions of evolution are rejected. For example, it rejects the idea that life originated out of non-living matter, as it's believed only God can give life. And it also rejects natural selection and successive mutations as the mechanisms able to account for the progress from very simple organisms to the very complex, sometimes referred to as the molecules to man theory. What is retained is the basic idea of evolution being change with respect to time. This change, however, is believed to be limited to variety within species. For example, there's many breeds of dogs, but they'll never evolve into totally different sorts of animals. And therefore, according to this theory, no amount of time, whether millions or billions of years, would be long enough to produce the creation that we see around us today, whether on the Earth or in the solar system or in the universe. Such infinite variety was created by God, not by naturalistic processes. One way of referring to these two types of evolution is macroevolution, that is the large-scale molecules to man theory, and microevolution, that's the ability to produce different breeds of the same species. And sometimes one sort of evolution has been confused with the other, and people who believe in progressive creation have therefore sometimes been accused of believing in evolution. This theory of progressive creation is usually held in conjunction with the day-age theory, which was described in the previous talk, and the scientific details are ascribed to each day in Genesis 1 in order. There's several versions of the theory which may vary in the details, but the overall gist is the same. For this reason, what I'm going to say is taken from one of the main current proponents of the theory, Dr. Hugh Ross. Three main things have to be kept in mind regarding the biblical account, and they are, first, the creation events are described in the simplest possible terms. And the second is that the Bible account is selective. And thirdly, the frame of reference of Genesis 1 is established in verse 2 as the surface of the deep, that is, from the point of view of an observer on the surface of the ocean. And it's also believed that 12 major miracles were performed by God during the long creative period, a miracle being defined as an event or action that contradicts scientific laws or defies the probability of chance occurrence. And so these 12 major miracles listed are, number 1, bringing the universe into existence, number 2, transforming the atmosphere from opaque to translucent, number 3, creating a stable water cycle, number 4, creating the moon, number 5, creating land and oceans in equilibrium, number 6, creating plant life on land, number 7, transforming the atmosphere from translucent to transparent, number 8, creating complex sea animals, number 9, creating the birds, number 10, creating complex land animals, number 11, creating man, and number 12, creating woman. Having stated these prior assumptions, the account in Genesis is then interpreted as follows. The heavens and the earth are believed to have been created or initiated billions of years ago, in accordance with Genesis 1 verse 1, and in accordance with modern scientific theories. This is the first of the 12 major miracles. The universe is believed to have been producing stars for at least 10 billion years and is still going on. Theories of interstellar gas and dust eventually condensing into stars and planets are accepted, one of these planets being Earth. Once the Earth condensed, it was at first formless and empty, as described in verse 2. And then we get to day 1. The second major miracle is described as taking place on the first day, and it was the appearance of light. This involved changing the Earth's atmosphere from opaque, that is light absorbing, to translucent, which is light diffusing, so that from the perspective of an observer on the Earth's surface, day and night began once the light diffused through the cloud cover, and this process may have taken millions of years. Next, day 2. The third miracle was creating a stable water cycle on the second day. The balance of environmental factors had to be precise to enable this to happen, and again such a process probably took millions of years. It suggested that the words in verse 6, "Let there be an expanse between the waters to separate water from water," were the closest that, and I'm quoting here, any 15th century BC Hebrew could perhaps get to describe the making of the water cycle. Next, day 3. The fourth miracle was the Earth-Moon system coming into existence. Ralph Baldwin, a former lunar expert, said in a fundamental survey of the moon in 1965, "There's no existing theory of the origin of the moon which gives a satisfactory explanation of the Earth-Moon system as we now know it. As that's the case, it's best treated as a miracle." However, it suggested as a possibility that when the moon perhaps pulled away from the Earth, it left a large indentation into which the waters of the Earth flowed, resulting in the dry land of day 3 appearing. The fifth miracle is then required, which ensured that the land and oceans were maintained in equilibrium. And the sixth miracle was the creation of plant life on the land. It's emphasised that a miracle by God was necessary for the plants to come into existence, as the odds against it happening by chance are effectively zero. It's pointed out that the text does not say that all land vegetation appeared on day 3, but that it merely states that this was a time of plant production. This explanation is necessary in order to avoid critics of the theory who point out that flowering plants, among others, appear much later in the evolutionary chain than certain animals do. It's also acknowledged that according to evolutionary theory, simple ocean life forms came into existence during this period of time, whereas the Genesis record doesn't mention these on day 3. However, despite there being no mention of them, the theory concludes that such an omission does not mean their creation was any less of a miracle. One of the major 3 assumptions, you'll remember, of the theory, as reiterated earlier, is that the Genesis account is selective. Next, on day 4, the 7th miracle was the transforming of the atmosphere from translucent to transparent, so that the cloud cover finally broken up enough to result in the appearance of the sun, the moon, and the stars. And this is the explanation of what is described in Genesis 1, verses 14 to 18. And again, this process is understood to have taken millions of years. Next, on day 5, once the sun, moon, and stars were visible to regulate the biological clocks, then God performed the 8th great miracle of creating complex sea animals. Here it's assumed that these included lower vertebrates, including reptiles and amphibians, and a further assumption made that invertebrates had been created earlier. The 9th miracle was the creation of the birds. And next, on day 6, finally on the 6th day, the last 3 miracles of creation were performed: the creation of complex land animals, man, and then woman. It's believed that modern man is distinct from all the other animals, including the hominids that preceded him, in that he's both morally and religiously aware, and in his use of language. The first modern man was Adam, and he was created about 15,000 years ago, plus or minus 10,000 years or so, which is in accordance with the present-day scientific estimates. In addition to the above suggested scenario, it's believed that if particular creation events are specifically limited to the creation days on which they are mentioned, this is reading too much into the text. It's quite probable that although each event or life form mentioned on any one particular day was primarily introduced then, a few may have been created on a preceding or subsequent day. For example, although most lower vertebrates were introduced on the 5th day, some may have appeared on the 4th and the 6th days. In other words, creation events may have overlapped. Finally, it suggested that this outline of progressive creation, whereby God created a certain number of life forms periodically over the millions of years of the geological ages, fits in very well with the scientific discoveries made to date. Scientists now agree that many life forms appear to have been relatively stable for long periods of time in the past, until they suddenly died out and were replaced by new life forms which somehow spontaneously appeared. This is known as punctuated equilibrium. However, people who believe in evolution would not accept that God was responsible for the spontaneous appearances. They believe that some other naturalistic method must be involved. In the next talk, we're going to look at the advantages and the disadvantages of accepting this theory of progressive creation.